Thanks everyone for coming out to this sort of yucky weather evening. I think the topic is well worth the time and the effort. Tonight we've got a program concerning partnering with bigger fish. So obviously, you know, we're looking at relative size. A little bit about this program. We've been doing the software entrepreneurship SIG for about 9 years now, so it's been around. If anybody wants to help get involved or has any topic suggestions or complaints, whatever, find one of these guys with the committee badges or myself. There's David Powsner and Shirish and Vineet and even Graham sometimes.
And Mike.
In the mix, and Mike. And we're always looking for people to come and help out and bring fresh ideas and new perspectives and, you know, rattle our cage a little bit. For the MIT forum in general, you know, this is part of the sort of ecosystem for entrepreneurialism. For our SIG, we try not to do the rote sort of things that you get out of MBA 101 business kind of stuff. We try to go off a little bit. So what we've done this year is bring in a bit of a twist where we'll have a treatment of a technical discussion. Most of these have been targeted at iPhone development and other mobile things. And tonight we're going to have Todd talk about development on the Windows mobile platform, which would be kind of cool. To introduce our panelists, we have Rong, who is Industrial Liaison Program, senior person in that capacity. And you could talk about what that does, but essentially if you're a corporation, you want to do business with MIT, you interface with their office. And they're great at matching technology with needs, et cetera, et cetera.
Basically the gateway.
Yeah. Hiram, Sloan fellow. And we look forward to hearing from you. And Todd, Microsoft, I'm the nerd, New England Research and Development Lab, right? And we're allowed to say that?
Sure, we love calling it the nerd.
So the format is we'll give each speaker about 10 minutes to give some thoughts, informal, not really prepared, about the topic of partnering with big fish. When do you do it? Why do you do it? How do you do it? Is it worth it? What are the risks? And other things that I'm certain I have not thought of. So after those 10-minute intervals, usually we open it up for questions. So if anything has come up, you know, that you want to address the audience, the panelists with, that would be the time to do it. And then that usually opens up for a little while. And then we'll come to, at a natural point, we'll stop and go into the technical discussion a little bit about Windows app development. So with that, have I missed anything?
That's great.
David?
No.
Okay, so Graham, go ahead.
Thank you, Chris, and also thank you everyone for coming to this event. And I used to be active, very active with this group, and just getting busy, but I still try to get back. I think this is good group. My name is Graham Wright, and I actually used to be a small fellow, like what Hiram is, and I graduated and then never left MIT. I can tell you. Now, full-time with MIT, and dealing with both big fish and small fish, really. Because we really help big fish find out small fish in MIT, mainly MIT startups, and help them match and work together. Obviously, we watch all this, how big fish work with small fish, all this stuff. And come back to my experience, I think I work also in big fish as well. I work with large organizations and I work with different partners, large and small. And also work with small, I have my own startup. And also I work with medium company that we work with large, like big blue companies as well. So I can share some experience with you. I think I can tell 3 short stories of my real experience related to this topic today. First one I can tell you is, I think before I tell you, I'll say first of all, if any big fish come to you and ask, say, hey, can we talk? Like, seems like you're doing something maybe interesting. We can find out. Are you interested to talk or meet to see if we can find out an opportunity to work together? That's good news to you. Whether it's a trap or it could be a good future, should be good opportunity, good news for you. Also, not necessarily good opportunity, but it is good news to you because your stuff has got attention by somebody, interested by somebody. But then let me tell you a few stories, 3 stories that I can share quickly. First one is when I was in actually a media company and I led an R&D group. We developed a CRM tool, as you may know, a customer relationship management software system. And we started from a concept to design to product development and then in that entire process, in fact, right at the beginning, when we were doing the concept design, we found that a good way to do that could be to find out some big partner and specifically a big potential customer. So that's a big fish, but there's a type, we call it a customer. So what we did, that one actually went successful, very successfully, the outcome. What we did is we nearly discussed and negotiated an agreement with this really big bank. They came join us by signing up a big, really upfront, big chunk of money as a joint R&D program. And the arrangement went this way. They sign up and pay a big amount of money at the beginning and join us with the R&D. Then we give them a big discount once the product is ready. So they can basically pretty much get the money back. But obviously you can see when I say this, the advantage for this small company, the small fish, is that you first of all you get some dollars that really badly need for most of the startups. Second, you get customer, the potential customer, actually the big buyer, almost like sign up on day one with your product. Third is you get this big customer, or immediately the loyal customer for you, and they work with you really very hard because they have very good resources who can afford to work with you, provide concept, customer feedback, and even join some of the development work, special customization, customized development specifically for their application. Really, we found it so good. This kind of big fish and small fish relationship is really good. So the type is you work with a big fish in customer category. There are lots of details I can share with you, but for time sake, I want to go to the next one. Second story, also the real story we worked with a big bluefish company. This bluefish is really interesting software system. And we said, wow, it's a good big brand. They have broad service distribution, sales distribution, and very large customer base. It's wonderful. We should work with them. We negotiated again, many times. And they came to our meetings, so we came to their meeting, their sites for different meetings, our customer engagements, etc. And after almost like 6 months or so, we realized this is a very bigger bluefish, but actually it's not a good partner to work with. Basically, they want to learn all what you have. And after probably another 12 months or so, they release their product in the same category. So that's something I think, good thing is we did not sign anything, but otherwise it could be very tough. But a lesson is this, and I'm sure they will tell you more about how to protect your ID. Really, if you do anything, you should upfront. I have something ready. either patent or IP protection policy, something, right, something at the beginning. Otherwise, if you can have like a big number of people working on something like you develop, but they have more resources to do. Third one I also want to talk to you is actually another type. That's is in the incubation type, because right after my Sloan year, once you talk to any Sloan fellow graduate, everybody wants to run a company or run a country. or run United Uni, like what the Coffee Island does. So what we did is I have started my startup in the software for financial service. That's actually a good one. And really work it out. It's very cutting edge. In fact, it's too cutting edge to get the majority of the people on the street understand and take it. So we try to trim down, make it easy and all that. And then the CEO of a big company come to me, call me and say, Graham, we should have a conversation and discuss about opportunity. I said, great. I mean, for a BD guy like that, like him, and should be a great opportunity for us. So we did have a good meeting. And the meeting basically started like this. After all this greeting, all this stuff, they say, Graham, what you would do with us if I give you $1 million? Obviously, he knows what I have been doing. I said, oh, what I will do? I tell some few things like what I have been doing. I said, let's discuss about how to do it. So we did. In fact, what I was offered is not just the money. We were also offered office space and development staff, as I told Dave the other day. So we can have a group of engineers work with you and have office space we can use and tell us what else you need and we'll do it. But I call it about incubation. Obviously, it can work out well. And so we had a discussion. I think it ended up a very good relationship, but we did not do an agreement on something, joint development or something. But that could be something I will say recommend if possible. The incubation is a good way to go. And of course, the first one, if a customer, is a good way to go. I'll stop here and let my fellow panelists to continue.
Yeah, so let me interject. Something I forgot to mention is we meet occasionally on Sunday mornings and do these podcasts, which I believe there are links to on the Enterprise Forum.
We have 3 of them up, and actually we've got a clearance now to release them. They're if I say they're horrible, then you won't expect anything. But we've been recording our conversations, and then just this past weekend or this past half week, both Hiram and Graham, we've recorded discussions with them, and we'll try to add to that. And we'll start sending out links. So just take them as beta podcasts right now. None of us are professionals at recording and editing and all that, but they could be interesting. We're hoping to develop overall the series of programs a library of tapes on this stuff, on all the topics we hit with the panel discussions.
Yeah, basically we meet and talk about staging what we talk about here and sort of queuing that up. So it's a great segue to what you see presented tonight. There you go.
So I'm Hiram Samel, and like Graham, and like I tell you what, Sloan he was always right. I'm actually still I never left, but I'm like, I'm not getting paid. I'm actually a PhD student at Sloan. But in my previous life, and also kind of now too, I'm an entrepreneur as well. So I thought, and I'm not in the software business. I've invested in a couple of web startups. One of them actually we sold to eBay and May. You may have heard it. Ulocate was called where.com.
Sure.
I was on the board of a company called SIG that we had sold to Ulocate, kind of a recommendation-based engine. But what I thought I would do is kind of share with you my experiences sort of as a little fish. So the biggest company I've had has been 400 people. The company I have now is a little under 100, a little bit bigger before the recession, but it's a little bit smaller now. And my whole life has been sort of the perspective of the little fish dealing with big fish. So I'm going to share, in like Graham, 3 stories. 2 as kind of a manager, entrepreneur, and 1 as an investor. And the first one relates to the first business, which was a business I didn't even get in by choice, but was actually kind of a family business that was in consumer durables distribution. kind of selling things like lawnmowers, TVs, appliances, sheet vinyl. It's not a particularly sexy business. And in my infinite wisdom, we were about a $20 million company. In my infinite wisdom, I said, you know, it's a crummy business, but if you just get more of it, we'll get good. So that's kind of, there's a lesson in that. I would say that's not a great strategy. But in any case, I bought a bunch of them around the Northeast United States. It grew up to about $100 million. And when you're a distributor, what you really do is you're kind of a little fish, and your portfolio is getting big fish. I mean, you go and try and find big fish on the rise, kind of medium fish on the rise that you can hook in, or also bigger fish. And so at the time when we were in this business, we sold people like Sinha, which were kind of big consumer brands. I don't know really where they are now. Usually now it's been bought by, went bankrupt and bought by LG. But what I learned from that though is that kind of what I'm going to call the law of unintended consequences or unanticipated consequences. And so when you do this, it was granted a house of cards. I borrowed about $20 million to buy all these companies, and we had developed a rural strategy, which was we could add value in a rural area, in less so in an urban area, but counterintuitively in the lawnmower business, we could actually in cities, because there just weren't a lot of people that wanted to sell lawnmowers in cities, I guess. And so we did this, and what happened was, again to the early 90s, one of these big companies, Amana, which was owned by Raytheon at the time, wanted to terminate its big city distributors because of these big box retailers that were coming in. They didn't feel they needed distributors anymore. And they were going to keep everybody else on. And so they went to do that. And what they found, they had a pretty good legal department, I would say, which is not a very good legal department. What they found is that certain states have different franchise laws. And so they couldn't really terminate these guys unless they wanted to buy them out. And so, which ultimately they ended up doing. But in their infinite wisdom, they said, you know, let's just terminate them all. And then we have kind of legal cause. David will probably give you better advice on this, but legal cause, let's just get rid of them all. And that will be the end of it. We won't have this legal problem. Well, to make a long story short, two of them did that to us, since we went from, I don't know, 100 to 60 million, but when you have a house of cards, it tumbles pretty quickly. And you kind of get shrunk. It was for nothing that we were making money. We actually had a pretty good business. But it's kind of, you know, if you're going to lay your stake with big companies, what you have to realize is that a lot of times they do things that have absolutely no, you know, has absolutely no intention of your business, but affects you in a big way. So you really, you know, I wouldn't sort of recommend that you kind of, unless you have to go and depend upon a big company. I'm not a big believer, even as an investor, in the 800-pound gorilla theory of, you know, you're going to sell your company to the guy next door here, or to Google, or to Apple, or something like that. But you know, you build kind of a more robust strategy. And as part of that, I would say there's a corollary I learned from my second company, and that is that when you deal with big companies, you need to try to get someone inside that has real decision-making ability and has got some sort of I would say like almost sustainability. They've been there for a long time, that they have some sort of power, even if it's not the people you deal with. Many times you might deal with someone in business development, but they may turn those guys over, or they may go on to a different program. And so the story is I have I own a company called Merida. We have plants here in Boston and Fall River, and we kind of do specialty textiles. We make textiles out of plant fibers, sort of obscure things like sisal, seagrass. And about 15 years ago, I put Williams-Sonoma, which at the time was a kitchen catalog, into the run business. So you might have heard of Williams-Sonoma. They also happen to own Pottery Barn. And we put both of them into the run business. And so we're designers. And so I'm a textile designer by hobby. And so we put them into that business. We would design rugs for them. We would make them, and we made them here in the United States. And so we grew it up into, you know, maybe a $10 million business. But for us, that was a good-sized business and good margins. And about 3 years later, so in that retail business, what you deal with is generally buyers that come through every 2 years, they cycle through. And so someone came through and said, you know what, we're going to reduce our costs, we're going to drive the supply chain, we're going to take this product to, you know, developing countries. And they did. And what we did was we actually knew the vice president of merchandising. And so every time we went out to San Francisco, we would go visit him and show him new stuff. Even though we had no business. For 4 years, we did this about 3 times a year, and they were willing to see us. Show them things that we were working on, things that we were doing. And lo and behold, that business actually did come back to us, and we have it again. And we split it between stuff we make in the States and stuff we actually make in Asia primarily. But the lesson I learned from that is it's really helpful to know someone that actually can make a decision, because the people you might be dealing with, especially if you're a real little fish, and you know, it might be a strategic investment of a couple $1 million, which for many companies is really nothing. those people may be gone. And you may be a victim of not having an advocate higher up in the company. That kind of leads me to the third story, which is sort of my experience as an angel investor. So I've invested in maybe 7 companies, primarily in the clean energy space, medical device. They said a couple of web companies. And you know, my theory, as you can tell for someone that makes rugs out of paper and sisal, is I kind of try to look for white space where people aren't in these kind of markets. And so on boards that I sit on, I try to say the same thing when people think about strategic investors, is to go and try and find someone that may not be the main target, but someone that may have a real strong interest in a product that you're developing. Because they might actually be a better partner for you, because you may mean more to them, and you might have a little more leverage up, rather than being just another company in a portfolio where you don't really know what their goal is. And for me, as an angel investor, I'm obviously interested in non-dilutive equity. So I mean, the first thing you try is to go and get government money, and then do a cost-sharing arrangement with a big company. So a little bit like to Graham's point, where they'll come and put design engineers or engineers in for you to share the cost. But short of that, what I found in a couple cases is that inevitably what happens is you are successful at finding companies. They might be in service industries that are kind of orthogonal to where your market is. And what you do is you go in there and you encounter a couple of problems. And some of those problems are, number one, is they don't really know how to value technology companies, at least not the way that we like to think of technology companies or this little ecosystem around here that a venture guy might do. And so if you were to go and talk to them, they might say, you know, you want me to invest $1 million, but you want a $10 million deal? Who are you kidding? You don't even have a product, you're not even selling, you got $100,000 in revenue. I don't think I'm going to give you a $10 million valuation. So you have these kind of, ongoing conversations, and what I would say is, there's lots of strategies you can use, and some of the cleverer ones that I've seen is kind of, you may have to end up accepting a lower valuation, but you can trade that for warrants. And you can say, okay, you telling me you're going to do all this stuff, we've got this kind of nice arrangement. And what you can do is you can say, if you perform up to this, I'll give you warrants, and so we'll lower the valuation. But if you don't, I want a higher valuation, because that's sort of whatever. And then you kind of get the, you can go on to your next investor and say, okay, I got a pretty good valuation on this round, so you get a pretty good step up, at least if you already had a small angel round. But it allows you to have a little more strategy. You get some sort of development out of that. And then the second thing is, and I think that David knows much more about this than I do, but it's this whole conversation with the IP fence and sort of who gets the rights to the IP. And then a lot of these companies are going to want rights of refusal on board appointments, on who you're selling and what you're selling. And so these are sort of all things that I would recommend that you really think about. I think strategic investors are really a great way to go when it comes to startups, from my point of view, because you're trading off the network that you get with a venture sponsor, but you're also getting, hopefully, it's a much tighter relationship where if you can go and embed what you're doing in there, you can learn from them and iterate. And I just recommend probably that you do some sort of performance things in your contract that helps you kind of solidify that relationship and gives them a little skin in the game above and beyond just the money they put in. That's it. Thanks.
Todd?
All right,
Thanks.
so I'm Todd Mancini. I'm I'm the U.S. Chief Technology Evangelist for Developer Tools at Microsoft. There's a bit of a lie, not actually based on the Nerd Center, but we'll just, because it sounds cool, we'll just say that I am. So I've been at Microsoft a little over 5 years, and Microsoft is really a company built upon trying to establish partnerships with all sorts of people. So if you're looking to partner with Microsoft, there's really a lot of different ways you can do it, and it depends upon kind of what kind of organization you are. We do have an incubation team. We can talk about what that means. And then we have various partner programs. So partnering is so important to Microsoft. It's really kind of part of our ecosystem that we have very formalized partnering programs. And they're very easy to get involved with. It could be everything from just becoming what we call, quote unquote, a Microsoft partner, where you're essentially registered with a partnership to Microsoft that says, hey, I can provide the following services. Maybe you're a consultant of some kind. You do network installations or you write custom software, whatever it may be. And then we have this whole kind of catalog of all of these people out there. And if I'm now a consumer saying, hey, I need someone to write me an application, How do I find that person? I can go to partner.microsoft.com and say, hey, I need someone that can do X, Y, and Z, and the tool will give me information on that. So that's just kind of one kind of partnership. But the more interesting ones, I think, are, especially if you're in the startup realm, are two programs, one called DreamSpark, which is really geared towards students and educators and institutions. And basically, if you're a student and you pay for anything from Microsoft, you're probably doing it wrong, because there's so many ways to get stuff from Microsoft for free if you become involved in one of these programs. So DreamSpark, I think it's just dreamspark.com. And if you're no longer a student and you've now got a startup, we have a program called BizSpark, which you would think would be bizspark.com to match that, but I think it's microsoft.com/bizspark. And BizSpark is really about finding startups, and essentially in your first 3 years, with like under $1 million in revenue, and for very little money or close to free. And when I say very little, it might be like $100. I'm not sure the particulars there, but it's in that ballpark. We essentially give you kind of everything you need to build up your technology on our platforms. So whether that's putting things on Windows Server, or using SQL Server as your backend database, or using our Azure-based cloud services, we essentially make that available to you for close to free. It's about as close as you can get. And then, after 3 years, you kind of graduate out of this program where you might say, well, we're not going to continue, and maybe the startup didn't succeed, or you've moved on to other things. That's A-okay, and you even get to kind of keep some of the stuff you've got if you want to just keep using it. Or you can actually graduate to then become kind of more of a real Microsoft customer, and you still get discounts and things, but one of the reasons that we're motivated for BizSpark is certainly so that we can cultivate organizations, especially startups, to build on our platform, because that ultimately benefits us as well. We're a very metric-oriented type company. We measure everything. That's all we do all day long. The reason why there's always new versions of Excel is because we have new measurements that we're doing internally, so we need more powerful spreadsheets. But one of the things we do look at is our contribution to the local software economy, and so and that's a big part. And we feel that Microsoft has, especially in the New England area, and especially around Cambridge in particular, our efforts in the area are leading to growing the local software economy around here, and also the local construction economy. As one Cambridge Center on the corner here is our new building that's probably going to open in August that we're building up. So that's kind of the advertising blurb for partnering with Microsoft, and we can certainly go into that deeper during the conversation today. But I'll tell you a little bit about my background. Like I said, I've been at Microsoft for about 5 years. Back in the start of the millennium, I was working for the greatest search company on earth. That's right, Alta Vista. Yes. It was at the time. And then after Alta Vista, I was predominantly doing startups between 2002 and when I joined Microsoft. And I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head. In some ways, it's not what you know, but who you know. Paraphrase. I was lucky because I did partner with Microsoft early on. Back then, we had a program called Empower. And Empower was essentially, hey, you're kind of a small company or a startup and you're looking to kind of grow. Microsoft wants to give you all the tools and technologies you need. So it sounds a lot like BizSpark. It was kind of the precursor to BizSpark. It was substantially more expensive. I think it cost me $325, so it was 3 times the cost. And it was funny because you think, well, why is it $325? And then your first shipment of software comes. This is before DVDs were all that popular, just kind of starting to grow in popularity. I mean, the box was enormous, and it just had hundreds and hundreds of CDs of software in it. So I think it was the shipping was the reason why it was so high. So I worked very closely on our product, and Microsoft was always checking on you. Hey, how's it going? Do you need anything? And that was a great experience. But then I got involved in what was called the Technology Access Program, which we still run at Microsoft today, although I think they have a new name called Metro Programs, which is unfortunate because we have this other thing from a UI standpoint called Metro, which is, we'll get to that in a moment. So the Technology Access Program essentially is, hey, we're at Microsoft, we're developing something new, and it's not even beta yet, right? So maybe it's the next version of Windows, next version of SQL Server, could be almost anything. And we want real people doing real work to use it early on, like pre-alpha, to make sure it does what you want it to do. So it's not just, hey, make sure it's not broken, it's really helps shape what it could be. So I got involved in the Technology Access Program for .NET 2.0. So .NET is a programming paradigm available on the Microsoft platform, and one of the big features of .NET 2.0 was its ability to support 64-bit. And they didn't really have a lot of 64-bit examples of .NET that they could really put to the test. My first startup that I was at, we were focused on, we were building kind of essentially a database engine that was able to do both kind of world-class enterprise searching combined with XML data parsing and searching. And that whole engine was built in .NET. And we were anxious for 64-bit support because we really could consume a lot of memory to make everything run fast. And it was because of my involvement in that Technology Access Program, I got the opportunity to go out to Microsoft for a week and actually meet with the team that essentially were the authors of .NET. And I kind of went out on my own dime. They gave me a room, I think, but I kind of flew myself out there. And it was a great experience, but the most important part of that experience was the people that I met and having those relationships. So as I went on to, as that startup rolled into another startup and that changed, and then suddenly I found myself, what do I do next? That's kind of where I rekindled my relationships back at Microsoft and kind of landed me the job I have today, which I must say I do enjoy. It's very weird going from being a company of 1 to being a company of 100,000, but I like not having to pay my health insurance anymore. That was getting to be the hardest part of my life, quite honestly. So that's about it for that story, and I'm sure people might have some questions about some of that stuff, so I'll open it up to when we get to that point.
Sure. Questions? Go ahead, sir.
Todd, how do you deal if someone's coming along and you're Microsoft, and I'm coming along with something that is probably it's at the under your radar, but probably if it grows, if it's successful, is going to potentially be perceived as competing with one of your cash cows. Not as dramatic as, I'm going to replace Office, but I don't know, something.
And so,
how does, but you have the environment, the tools that I need to build this coming magic. And I don't want to show my hands too much, but
sure.
But at the same time, maybe I'm thinking that, hey, part of my inspiration is I can build a better mousetrap than what you got out in the field so far.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we definitely have incubation teams, right? And depending on what stage you're at, we can the first and most important thing if you want to be at all involved with Microsoft is just get to know us, And we run a lot of events locally all the time. Nerd Center's over at One Memorial. There's events there all the time. Go on the web, find out what we're doing, come meet the people, talk to them, get to know them, let them get to know you. Now, let's go by a real-world example. We have no end of money that we've spent developing our communication platform, which its current incarnation is called Link, right? So it's instant messaging. It does void. It can essentially be your entire phone system for your whole company. It's our phone system for our whole company, no matter what office you're in. If you have video conferencing and teleconferencing and voicemail and all those things, it seems kind of odd that you would go and buy something like Skype, right? But the reality is that we will find things that are complementary and bring value to us, and so we don't always think it as a hostile type relationship. So even if you think you have something that's competing with what we're doing, that's usually not the attitude we take. I mean, if you get something that's truly innovative, that's probably going to be interesting to us because we can only come up with so many ideas on our own, right? And if someone innovates, that we're keen on innovators out there. And so I always think Skype is a great example of like, oh no, people think, well, they must compete with us. It's like, well, no, we find that to be actually a really good partnership. So much so that we spent $8.5 billion on it. And when I met those people over the summer, they were some of the happiest people I've ever been around. Right, exactly.
Go ahead, Dave.
For any and all of you, excuse me, what are your thoughts on the value of hunting down a big fish who I suppose might potentially try to take your technology or at least an advanced look at it, versus going to try getting money from venture capital? How do you weigh out venture capital on the one hand and a big fish who maybe is a customer but maybe a competitor downstream?
I mean, that goes sort of to my, my third story. I mean, essentially, that's a tough choice to make many times because, you actually, in that case, you have a real customer. I mean, my first recommendation would be is try to go somewhere where someone else hasn't gone, so you have some sort of leverage in terms of trying to convince them that what you do is really meaningful to them. So, what does that mean? I mean, that means kind of look at, in other words, don't look at the usual suspects if you can. So try to find out, if you happen to have software, and this is where I don't know the space, but maybe less helpful. But if you have a product that a manufacturing company wants, or an industrial user, or an insurance company, or something like that wants, that they normally wouldn't be in that space. Could be a bundled product with software, for example. I mean, that's a reasonably good example where you could take something and it might work into some sort of information hub that they have. It might be collecting some sort of data for some reason. That's the kind of thing where you could go partner with someone that has that device. If you don't, you have the software that actually collects it. And then you can then go and put a couple of them together and then go to some sort of ever entity that could be doing it somewhere in the healthcare space or somewhere in the insurance space or some ever space where you can go. For at least from my point of view, I think that's a better strategy than weighing the two because if you find yourself, you can't find that, you just have kind of venture versus strategic investor. I think it's a question that I would probably say, what's the quality of the venture firm? So just, this is sort of the academic in me now that, says basically if you look at the research on venture, only really the top decile really have, kind of above mean returns. I mean, the rest of them stink. And so if you look at kind of where the returns are to the entrepreneur in a sense. In other words, you can take a good entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur, who will be successful with a crummy venture firm, as opposed to a first-time entrepreneur with a bad venture firm. And so, my feeling is if you have good quality venture firms, someone that that's well respected and is well respected in the community, then you might be better off with them than you might be with a strategic investor. If your choice is a second-tier venture firm, and you have a strategic investor, you might want to at least give that consideration a little more space.
Yeah, I can also add some more. Feel free, Todd. So what I can see is, first of all, if there's any kind of a big fish who can, maybe you can let it hunt and you can have this kind of a discussion and a possibility you would like to explore like opportunities. First of all, you definitely want to evaluate carefully what the value this company can give to you. And actually, you want to see is really not just today, also tomorrow. From yesterday to then tomorrow, see where the company is going. Maybe the company is looking into a new field, just what you are in. Then definitely, maybe good just to see really. And also the second is what the risk can bring to you too. I mean, you have to keep a good balance. And then to see what's your value proposition to that company, what they can bring to you. I totally agree with what Hiram says. Really, if you can get a big fish to work with you, especially not a potential competitor, that's really, really like a strategic investment to you. And it's not only the money to work with you, that's more important. Even you're looking for a VC, it's not just the money, right? It's more important is the VC work with you, it help you to grow. That's I think the most important part. Like for instance, right now, my office here in MIT work really from both big fish and small fish also. So small fish really mainly all the MIT startups. We try to help them bring to like find out really big fish they can date, they can start. Ideally, I mean, if they all work well, they can get married. Then that's really something I hope. Of course, we help them start a date, and then if they get married or not get married, it's not something we can guarantee.
And I'd say that in my experience, ultimately my first startup, we got funded through our customers. We partnered with them to deliver a product that they wanted, and they were willing to kind of pay up front to shape what that was going to be. I went to some VC firms. It was a very humbling experience. I mean, you go in there with what you know the value of your company is. And I remember I was at one meeting and they bring you in this room. It was like this 60-foot African mahogany table, and the valuation they gave on my company was, I think, less than the cost of that table. Which was very humbling. But at the same time, I do feel that when I think of the mistakes that we made along the way, if I had partnered with a VC, you definitely want to have somebody that isn't just giving you money, but is giving you that advice, is helping you to run your company. And I mean, I was a technologist. I didn't know much about running a company, and I could have used probably a little more help there than I had. So it depends on what you pay for the experience, I guess. So many questions.
Vineet, go ahead.
Yeah, one question, a couple of questions. The first question is, large companies, so when you're talking about partnering with big fishes, these large companies typically have long sales cycles, right? And partnering to me sounds like it's going to be even longer, like 3-4 years to make something happen. What do you have any tricks beyond knowing the right person?
So I'm glad you said that, because it's actually, I wanted to say that. And I think that part of the, I just forgot to, but one of the, I think to your point, I mean, when you start a company, you not that you have this sort of etched in stone something, but sometimes, there are some people that say, I'm just going to be a serial entrepreneur and I'm going to really, go and my goal is really to exit in 2 to 3 years. You could be a technologist that says, I don't care if they hire a CEO or something like that, but so you somewhere you make a conscious decision that says, I want to build a business and grow it and stay with it. Or I'll look for a way, and you structure your business that way. That's how you choose your investors too, to a certain extent. I'm going to get a venture firm because then I know I'm going to have to get out of it and flip it or do something. So to that point, if you say, and for my understanding of most software companies is that the technology's gotten so good with it that you don't need a ton of money to at least get on the market. It's really not in the app space or something, and a couple $100,000 would be pretty far. And so, I mean, I think there's lots of ways that you can tap some money without even going to a strategic investor. But I think I would agree with that. I think that is the trade-off is that if you work with a strategic investor to get you to scale, it may not be overnight. And if you kind of say, how am I going to get to scale quicker? You just might, you can get lost in the works. There's lots of things that can go wrong there. It happens. I don't know how often it happens, per se. So I think that it's kind of something that says, I really want to. No, if on the other hand, if you have something that needs to go through, say, some sort of clinical trial or is related to some sort of software that's embedded in some sort of personal medical device or something, and so you know that you're going to be around for a few years because you've got to run it through clinical trials or something, then that might be a more reasonable strategy. But if you're doing plain software that doesn't involve that, maybe I think I'm glad you raised that.
I agree.
I was going to say, interesting group because what I'm seeing here is on the incubator side, I've been in a number of startups, and when you come up with an idea and you go to the big fish, it's like a game of dodgeball. How much can you say to get them interested, and how much do you say so you don't give up too much? Because there are a lot of bright people there. I mean, it works both ways too. I could be in the room and scoop something up that somebody might have said that they didn't mean to say. And the whole IP game becomes a problem. So what seems to me from the incubator side and the innovation side, it's like they're infants. And then you've got the big fish at the other end, with very sharp teeth, but can't even tell what the hell it's biting. Sometimes you do things without even knowing. So what's needed is something in the middle. And I see, in this panel, which is really interesting, Graham offers, an academic, hey, this is a leather chair, cushy chair we can talk to. It's a sofa, so to speak. And I've got $1 million back here, so this is good. Is that the way to go? Second, I see, the Microsoft, which is, I don't know how comfortable I would feel inside the, this biz program that you have, because I feel like I'd have spotlights around me. I feel like people would be crawling in and out of my office that I didn't really want. I wouldn't feel that comfortable. And then, of course, I've got you in the center, which, you're sort of tapping between the two of them with your VC and, well, let me see how I can do this gig. But then you're selling a textile, so it's already, somewhat.
So you're sleeping on the beach in the Sicily rug.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly.
I mean, it's easier to go and you can say, hey, I got this, it's already done. What do you think? You don't know how I made it. Is there a fourth missing here? That perhaps, or maybe are we driving towards something converging? Is there a trend here that a layer's developing, or we're seeking a layer, because maybe that's what the incubators are looking for? I don't see the 100% answer here. I see 20 here, I see 20 there. I'm thinking, what are your comments? What are your thoughts on that?
I would just ask you if you have one first. And then see it sounds like you do, sort of, and that actually would be very helpful, because if you've got something.
I have a process of how to find one, but I can't quite tell you what that would be. You've highlighted some interesting points of, hey, cost barrier getting in isn't so high, so what the hell do I need to go to this big fish in the first place? That's how the VC's thinking these days. They're saying, hey, let me run the horse race here. I'll give 100 G's to 10 guys and then see who runs fastest, and then drop the other 7. That's not so good for innovation when you think about it. I'll bet you don't like that idea too much, because you're going to say, wait a second, I got some bright people here. I just dumped because it didn't meet this metric of today, for this particular VC. So, I mean, there's some issues to be talked about there. I think innovation has to be dealt with differently. And we're all, looking at it from our own perspective, so to speak. The VC's perspective is cash out. And that's like one of the worst things in the world in a business. I was going to ask you, what was that like when you're sitting there and some guy walks in and says, no, we're not going to do what you're thinking, because we need to cash out next year, and we're going to go to China instead of going to Latin America, or whatever the case may be, which I've seen that happen as well. And decisions get forced because of that cash out concept, as opposed to perhaps your own vision of carrying it on as a visionary, so to speak. I've gone on here, but what is the idea?
What you guys see.
Well, first I'd say is, like I said, Microsoft's a very big metric company. So BizSpark program, they care about how many people are in it. They have very little interest in coming to your office and seeing what you're doing. So don't, I wouldn't, if that was your primary concern about a BizSpark program, I would put that one to rest.
I'm giving you the feeling of developers that I've talked to.
Sure.
Yeah, when you go to Microsoft, it's like, they're trembling to do that. They're afraid they're going to lose everything.
And it's funny because the realities inside our organization is we got two things that we're big on. One is privacy, so making sure everyone's privacy is being maintained when you're using any of our online facilities, what have you. But the other one is it's like, don't tell us what you're doing, because it's so dangerous for us to have that conversation with you that very few people at Microsoft want to have that conversation with you. The general rule of thumb is if you want Microsoft to acquire you, you almost have to wait for Microsoft to decide they want to acquire you. You can't go shop yourself to Microsoft.
Yeah, so the odds are like 1 in 100,000. What's how interested can I be?
Right. You'll be surprised how many companies though have kind of pitched that as, I'm going to sell this to Microsoft.
I don't know if it's still operational, but I believe we used to have this email address where you could say, hey, I've got an idea I want you, Microsoft, to know about. And the whole point of the email address is so it bounce you back a form that says, please don't tell us anything we don't want to know. We'll find. It basically said, don't come to us, we'll come to you.
From the perspective of innovation, you're not doing innovation. You're protecting your interest, their interest, and then you've left the gap. I'm curious, Graham has, I think, the role that probably needs to be expanded upon, and that you're lacking, and somehow some, cooperation between the two of you would make more sense. Or you got behind an academic institution and you actually said, look, just put the money and talk to me when it reaches a certain level. But we're still supporting other innovation along the way because we know that's important. That's just a thought.
I can share some points that could be useful to all of us. And of course, this is for discussion. Feel free to really get back. For big fish, if you're looking at it globally, not just Boston, not just Cambridge, it means could be different meaning, means differently. Like we do have some organizations in different countries, especially the emerging market. They actually, what they do, they really actually are very eager to work with some small fish. Can be in Cambridge, can be in England, can be anywhere, especially in like this area with intensive, intellectual properties. They are willing to really support some innovative ideas, and really not like the traditional concept that we are thinking. You got to steal your stuff and I want to put it into a product, or even like 5 years. What they really do is have a portfolio of different areas they want to explore, and then they really want to see if there's anyone who can work out well, and it's good. And most of this kind of big companies of fish are really supported by regional government or community or something, a business entity or a government entity. So really, their money is easy, first of all. So they use that, and if any of this special startup can get anything like that, this kind of support or partnership, it's a good deal.
Yeah, I would say at least some of the things I've seen. I mean, this is not necessarily the software space, so it sounds like it's
No.
the software space, but in the energy space, there's lots of European companies that's around Cambridge investing in startups. And the reason is because they don't have the same university ecosystem that we have.
Right.
And they don't have the same incentive structure where the inventor gets the patent rights, or he shares the patent rights through the technology licensing office here. And so you'll find, so at least I have found a number of people that are in energy doing some sort of, either water or energy or something along those lines, that go and find a European strategic investor. Usually it's a large company. And it is a portfolio theory to a certain extent. You'll come over to the States and say, I'm going to find 5 companies in water, and I'm going to find 5 companies in PV, and I'm going to find 5 in smart grid or something like that. And they'll do that. And I actually think that, I think it's a good alternative to the venture. I mean, I think venture works. I think in many ways for what this country needs, it's a system, you can see sort of in the biopharma space too, that it's not great at long cycle innovation. It's really good at short cycle innovation. It really gets stuff going, but it's hard to really find companies that have grown and, that have taken, if you have an innovation and continuous process. So I suppose if you had software that went to a continuous process industry, so, you have huge incumbents, and it's not like they're on the leading edge, and so you really got to displace the incumbent to kind of get in there. That stuff takes a longer time, and I think maybe partnering with, again, this is sort of at least my theory, would be, a Japanese or a European company that has sort of different time horizon. Most if you look in energy that comes out of, at least this area here, it's like Great Point stuff, I think a lot of them end up going to China because they can't, they go and they do stuff, and they can't, they develop stuff and then they're kind of off working on other stuff. I mean, I think that there's, if you think of kind of the people in the wind industry, PV, they end up going there because, the energy grid is growing so fast that they're willing to deploy that so people can learn about that. People can learn about that stuff.
I think this might be a good time to get a Windows mobile development overview.
Sure. Great. So, don't develop on Windows Mobile. Windows Mobile is our old platform. Right? So, just from a terminology standpoint, so Windows Mobile phones were the phones that used to be those Windows phones that were very popular 5 years ago, and there were billions of them, right? And it was kind of a similar kind of model to what Android has today, where essentially Microsoft produced an operating system and made it fairly easy for anyone to get it. There was a handset manufacturer, and then they could basically take that operating system source code and all, compile the bits that they wanted, whether your screen, touch screen or not, yada yada yada, and produce a phone. And that made a whole lot of phones, but some of them were reasonably good. Most of them were pretty terrible. And I think it's kind of, and not, I'm not going to knock Android too much, but there are good Android phones and there are not good Android phones, right? There are ones that run well, ones that run out of battery quickly, things like that, because it's basically an open ecosystem that says, hey, if anybody wants to build an Android phone, you can license Android and you can stick it in your hardware and make a phone out of it, essentially. So now, fast forward to now, Microsoft, we have a new thing called Windows Phone. And it really is a completely new platform. It has nothing to do with Windows Mobile. We carry a hardware specification, so we don't make the phones. We still leave it up to handset manufacturers to produce the devices. But we do have what we call a chassis spec that basically says, hey, if you're going to build a phone, here's what it has to have in terms of hardware, in terms of responsiveness, so on and so forth. So, for example, like I got mine, and that's my phone, which is cracked right now. But it, even like how many points of touch. So it's a multi-touch screen. You have to have a minimum of 4 points of touch. So if you're going to build one of these, you have to support that. Oh, by the way, that touch has to register within, 0.6 of a pixel from the point that the finger is touching, right? So there's all these very low-level statistics and specifications that we put in that chassis spec. So when someone goes and produces a phone, they tend to be of incredibly high quality. So there's probably in the US right now 13, 14 different Windows phones you could buy across various handset manufacturers, and they're available from AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile. Sprint may have one, I'm not sure. Things like that. So that's the kind of, just from a hardware standpoint. Now from a development standpoint, the story on Windows Phone is actually, we think, very strong. The programming model that we use is essentially .NET. And if you've been doing development on Windows, you probably have done some degree of .NET programming, unless you are still one of the C# or sorry, C++ diehards. They still do exist, but most developers out there are C# developers or VB.NET developers. So the .NET platform is really the programming paradigm. So you use C# as your development language or Visual Basic, and with that you get a whole great set of developer tools. Visual Studio, which is kind of our professional development tool, is basically considered to be probably the most world-class development tool there is out there. Most other development tools that exist really try to mimic what Visual Studio does. So, I mean, I don't know of too many people that would argue that Visual Studio isn't among the best. Not that Eclipse isn't a great development tool as well, but if you look at a lot of the innovation in Eclipse, it wasn't really innovative. It was really more copying. That's just my personal opinion. So if you want to become a Windows Phone developer, you need to kind of learn .NET or know .NET. If you're currently a Java developer, learning something like C# is a relatively easy thing. You're going to need tools. And it's like, oh, well, now how much is it going to cost me? Well, actually, the tools are free. So if you go to create.msdn.com, MSDN stands for the Microsoft Developer Network, create.msdn.com, you can go there and download all of the tools you need to develop on Windows Phone. You get Visual Studio, you get something called Expression Blend, which is a UI design tool, and the tools include a world-class emulator. So you can actually run a Windows Phone emulator, just like a Windows Phone, right on your computer. And based on what people have told me as I go out and talk to people at Windows Phone development, and we do code camps, and I get people actively building on Windows Phone, they tell me that, if nothing else, our emulator is lightning fast as opposed to some of the other emulators that are out there. So I've heard that, like, if you have an Android emulator emulating the Android phone, that emulator, some people tell me, runs kind of slow relative to an actual device. where our emulator can potentially even run faster than the actual device if you have a good enough machine. And then when you actually start talking about developing apps for Windows Phone, so you got these great tools, you get a full world-class debugger to go with it, a profiler if you're into doing kind of low-level profiling of your code, and you can then easily deploy it out to the phone as well and just test right on the phone, including live debugging from your desktop to the phone. Our development model is a little bit different than other phones, though. I think if you look at most other phone OSs that are out there, including the old Windows Mobile, it was essentially you've got apps, and you can put apps on it, and put all the apps on it you want, and when you're done, you have a screen full of many icons of all these various apps, and go pick the one, right? And so now it's like, oh, okay, so I want to update my status. Right? A lot of people like to update their status. So what does that mean? Well, that means, well, I can go into the Facebook app and I can update my status. Or I can go into the Twitter app and update my status. Or maybe I go to the Foursquare app and I do a check-in there. And, you know, we took a step back and we said, what are people doing with their phones? What kind of operations are common that people want to do? And we realized that, like, updating your status is something that people do. And so we actually made that a first-class citizen in the operating system. So you can update your status in the operating system, that propagates out to your social networks under your control. Checking in is a first-class operation in the operating system that propagates out. So what that means is when you think about making an app for Windows Phone, don't merely think about, hey, I want to make an app that does X, Y, or Z. Think about how that experience would integrate into the operating system. So if you've got to do something that, you know, be relative to information about, you know, your friends, you know, there's a hub in here that's your people hub that is, you know, is all the people that you're friends with, and, you know, lets you quickly dial them, send them emails and things like that. But like their status updates that are coming from various social networks are all being aggregated into here. If I go look at, you know, my photos, well, it's not just my photos, it's really my pictures, including pictures that are coming in real time from my friends. So they might be posting into, you know, TwitPics, or maybe they're posting on Facebook, or wherever it is. That's all aggregated in. Same with music experiences, things like that. So we have these centers in the phone, these hubs, around people, around music, around entertainment, so on and so forth. And you can, when you're building your applications, you can say, oh, I want to extend that particular experience so that someone doesn't have to go necessarily scroll through a list of applications and find mine. Mine will be feeding dynamically into those hubs. And so that's when you learn about programming on Windows Phone, it's not just, oh, I've got to learn how to program in C#. I've got to learn how to do those other things. A couple of the last points I'll make there is that the development model, like I said, is basically .NET. From a visual display standpoint, it uses something called Samel, which is an XML-based markup language for putting on-screen elements, buttons, text boxes, images, what have you. So sort of like a development version of HTML, if you will. And then we have another little part of the paradigm called XNA, which is a framework for doing 3D audio and 3D graphics. Now the reason I mention those is that if you want to develop for Xbox, which you can also do for close to free with the same set of tools, once again, create.msdn.com will get you where you need to go. The development model on Xbox is .NET with XNA. So I've done this. I've actually written a game for my Xbox, and with very little effort, ported that same game to run on the phone. Because the code, you know, is about, I'm going to say it was at least 90% code share between those two applications, maybe higher. The graphics are essentially the same. They're higher. I've got higher resolution graphics on the Xbox, of course, but the sound, everything kind of ported over. And when you look forward to the next release of Windows, Windows 8, the development model on Windows 8, there are a few, but one of them is around .NET and XAML. So the notion of, hey, I've got these skills about writing an app for Windows Phone, you now have the set of skills you need essentially to write an app for Windows 8, which I think is going to be very compelling. You know, as Windows 8 comes out and people start either buying new devices based on Windows 8 or upgrading their existing machines. I mean, right now there's already, I forget what the number is, but let's say it's 400 million devices that are out there in the world today that are Windows 8 capable. You know, essentially, if you've got a machine out there that can run Windows 7, we've already said that it will be able to run Windows 8. That's a fairly compelling market. Oh, and by the way, all of these devices, be it the Xbox, Windows Phone, or Windows 8, all also have an app store associated with them. So you could actually be a very small independent developer like I was for the game I put out there that I have for sale on Windows Phone. Get it out there and you're off and running. And I think we have something, I think it's 30 seconds to launch or something like that, 30secondslaunch.com, I'll look up the address, which is essentially a website. It's like, hey, if you want to go program on Windows Phone, go to this website, they'll teach you how to do it. And I'm sorry, it's 30 days to launch, 30 seconds, not that. 30 days.
That's rapid.
It's that good.
Ultra rapid.
30 days, and it's basically, you follow like this 30-day tutorial from I know nothing to I'm publishing my application into the App Store for Windows Phone. You can absolutely do it. I can attest to this fact. You do not need a Windows Phone to develop on Windows Phone. I had my application, my first game that I put on Windows Phone was in the application store the day Windows Phone launched. I didn't own a Windows Phone because they weren't on sale yet until and then we as Microsoft employees weren't allowed to buy one the day they went on sale, so there would be enough left over for everyone else that wanted one. So it was, my game was actually out there, people buying it, and it was 2 weeks before I even could actually play it on my own phone because I wasn't able to get one. One of the ways I was able to make sure that it actually was going to work on a phone is, as I mentioned at the beginning, we do a lot of events around these parts. And you know, if you look at the event calendar, you'll find them. Back then, we were doing events where, hey, show up, we'll teach you how to program. Oh, by the way, we'll have a bunch of phones available so you can test out your game or your application on an actual device. And so I did that. I knew I wanted to make sure the touch parts worked really well. And I kind of spent my afternoon optimizing that, got the feel just right, got the tilt part feeling just right, and then I went back and 2 weeks later I had my app published. So very wonderful platform to develop on, especially if you're an existing .NET developer. The tools are phenomenal, and I highly encourage you to take a peek.
Thanks, Todd. That was great. Shirish, did you have a question?
No, I was going to talk about Android.
Okay.
May I ask you a brief question?
Go ahead.
Todd, Microsoft is huge. How to to find right people at Microsoft to offer something, for example, like my company has. No, I know to talk directly to you, and you could connect with someone who could be interested.
Yeah, I mean, we're a big company, and that can sometimes seem intimidating. I mean, the good news is we're just regular folk working there. So you find any Microsoft person, you know me now. I'm Todd Mancini at Microsoft.com. We'll definitely get you connected with the right people. I mean, the part of the organization that I exist in is called Developer and Platform Evangelism. We're hundreds of people in the U.S. and probably over 1,000 worldwide. Our main concern is reaching out to the community and getting you guys connected with us, getting you anything you need, or staying away when you don't want us to be. We'll do either, and helping you. So I mean, just reach out to us, absolutely. So start with me, and we'll get you to the right people.
I'll try.
You know what? I can share one tip which may be helpful. If you have an application or tool you think could be useful for a company, go directly to the line of business who may find us. Basically, your application can be a solution to the line of business. Talk to the business managers because they really like it. If they really like it, they sign the check. If you talk to the R&D, they want to learn from you. but they don't have the power to sign the check. That's the problem. They still need to get the business line to get it for you. And then before they get them, convince them, you have to convince them, these technical people first. Usually when we talk to them, I'm actually used to be CTO myself too. What happened is, any CTO in this room, by the way? What happened is, it's very tough to convince technology. I mean, I'm a technologist myself, but you need to convince them first. It's tough because they ask the nitty-gritty details. Business people, and all this here, I tend to be more on the business side than technology side. What they look is what you can do for me. If you can provide a solution to my headaches, sign check, they do it. And then they look into details after, which is what you want, right? If you want to look at the door, meeting after one after another. Then finally say, yeah, it's good. Then they find another one who can do it. At least you educate the people, but they don't get it. I mean, this is just some lessons I personally would like to. Many people, they don't understand. Hopeful. I hope it's useful.
So how about the cost of trying to work with strategic investors? Clearly there's concern about showing your cards in terms of your IP, but you're also engaging in a longer term relationship, as you're saying. What are some examples of how that goes off the rails, or how do you get out? Let's say you're in this relationship, all of a sudden your key guy leaves, but you still have these sort of agreements in place, right? Because this is going to be formalized to some level. You know, how do you manage and keep driving that and make sure that you get out of it what you intended to when you started?
I mean, this is just based on my own experience. I mean, you know, it sort of goes to your question. I mean, it's really, you know, kind of really what kind of bargaining power you have when you go in and what kind of deal you make. So, I mean, inevitably, if you have some sort of technology and you know, any kind of person you negotiate with, they're going to say, you know, give me the rights to all. And even though it may not be in the space they're in. So you just start there, you keep on working your way down. So I think, I mean, at least in my own experience, it helps to have really good advisors. I mean, you know, a good lawyer or a good investment banker if you want, you know, if you're kind of at that scale. But at least, you know, good friends or people or board or something that you can really turn to get it. Someone's certainly been there before, because the ones that I've seen that have turned out well over where they really carved up the intellectual property space. And so it's kind of, you know, what they made their deal was in that space, and that it had sort of performance characteristics. And so then the company was free to pursue other avenues. And where I've seen it not so well is a little bit of desperation. I mean, they actually, you know, oh, well, we got the fish on the line. And they kind of gave him the whole house of cards. In the worst case, it was kind of like, you know, it was like you say, it was almost as much of a trap. It would kind of just take them, get them there, rather than buying them, get them out of the marketplace. Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a huge spectrum. My strong encouragement would be is you're going to minimize your costs by sort of playing the field up front and getting your best deal, maybe your first deal to a certain extent. And so if you need to go further without talking with a strategic investor, try to get farther. You know, because once you get there, you know, it becomes contractual.
The most successful person in my startup company for the first year and a half was my IP attorney. But it was well worth the cost. So
is that Dave?
Yeah.
So behind you, Shirish. Sorry.
I'm just curious. First of all, I appreciate your insight here. Some of my research has led me to believe that there's kind of a time lag, especially pursuing intellectual property through patents, for example. A lot of time it'll take up to 3 years for it to issue. Is there a certain strategy you have when you're pitching your idea while your patent's not actually issued yet? Is there something that you may be able to talk to about that?
Well, first and foremost thing is don't talk about anything until you file a patent. Right. Because the second you start talking about it, the clock is ticking. You only have a year to file. So I had one idea that became an issue, and I think I got the filing done with a week to spare. I mean, and it's not easy writing a patent filing for anything that's reasonably complex. But other than that, once you file, you're provisionally protected. I mean, someone else that's an attorney could answer that better. But.
So file a provisional first.
Yes, yeah. File provisional.
Okay.
It takes a long time to go through the process.
Definitely.
Yeah, and another thing you should do is avoid this like a due diligence kind of discussion. They want to, oh yeah, we need to do due diligence before we can get deeper into the partnership. That's something you should be very careful. You know what it means.
Right. And as far as due diligence goes, if you're thinking of filing a patent on something, don't go out there looking to see if you might be violating some other patent. Don't go research other patents. That's actually probably not a good thing to do.
Yeah, I would certainly, David is here, so you talk to, I would certainly recommend you talk to a lawyer.
Yeah.
But just to quickly, just to hit, and these are the guys that talk, these guys are here to talk on the business side, but it probably does make sense to file before you talk, maybe not for the reasons that Todd has said, because talking to a business partner as opposed to making a sale or more relevantly an offer for sale is what gets the clock going, at least for the next year or so. But it just makes good sense to file because they're gonna try to, at least the perception is most of the big businesses are gonna try to take your technology and you want to at least have a stake in the ground before you start, and then go from there. But then turn back to these guys with how they handle. They'll have an answer.
Yeah, I think the patent law's changed though. I mean, it used to be, like Europe was different. Europe was sort of first to file. And here you could do something, you had a whole year before you really had to go.
And that's still in place for a bit, for another year.
It's going to change, I think. Right?
It's going to, the laws, Obama signed it in September, and it went in place in September, but it's the relevant part for first to file is going to shift over in March of next year.
So we got burned by that in Japan, for example. I mean, that was just, where patenting gets expensive, it's expensive in the States, but it's not that expensive. It's when you get into international patents. You're not going to go overseas and you want to, protect your rights overseas, and so you got to file. I mean, you can file like a couple of clearinghouses, but I can remember. It adds up. It adds up. At least, once you get outside of Europe, it adds up.
Probably the long and the short of it is to get your U.S. filing in, whether it's provisional or non-provisional, before you talk to the strategic partners, just to protect yourself. And whether it's for the reasons that Hiram is getting at or not, but just get that in file. But that, I mean, at least from a patent attorney's perspective, I think the way we look at it is, it's the I think we call the ugly baby syndrome, which is when before the baby's born, in this case, more relevantly before the patent issues, you can talk about what great technology or what a great patent it will be. So having the pending application shouldn't in general hurt you. You can talk about how you can look at it whilst potentially you can look at it, and maybe the business partner can look at it, and all say, well, I'm going to get really broad claims out of this when it issues. After it's issued, it is what it is. That's the ugly baby. Maybe you got crappy claims. So at least from our perspective, we see pending applications as great, and sometimes issued patents aren't so great because you really see what happened. But actually, I'd like to hear what you guys think.
I was just going to say the same thing. I mean, so two things, at least with Graham's point. So one company that was involved in, during due diligence, we had to show the patent application, but that was just a condition of whether they were going to invest or not. And two is that, I don't have extensive experience in patents, but the claims get narrowed down. So if you can't really get a large, you start large, but you kind of quickly find out how narrow they get. And there are ever strategies. Now, in the software space, maybe there aren't, but certainly in the businesses that I've been in, there are trade secrets. There's lots of other ways that you can kind of protect. In fact, I had friends that submarine their patent applications, and they sat in them for 5-6 years, and it was very effective for them. And they got such a network effect that they don't have a competitor today. This is a textile. It's not, this is not rocket science. So it happens to be the company that makes if you've seen the fabric of those of the Herman Miller chairs, and the Huron chairs that go like this, it's elastomeric. Very clever IP strategy. It was very simple. You sort of submarined it, and got Herman Miller to use it, and So if you get something, so where was the technology there? It was not only weaving this, but it was also getting the molding. So then you've got all these people that invest in the molds and all that stuff. So the kind of ecosystem builds up around this product. So even when people came out with competition, there was very little uptake. They all had their tools, they had all this stuff, and he has a terrific business. Imagine then in 5 years or 8 years, but at the time it was terrific business.
Maybe I can ask a question to the audience, like what kind of...
Yes.
Oh,
So
you have higher priority.
so you are negotiating with partnership, what type of leverage do you have as a small fish? Or in your experience, what type of leverage that you have used to get the agreement that you want?
I mean, I know in my experience, when I had a very small company, having a patent granted was probably the most powerful thing we had. That if you can actually go through the process of getting your patents in and actually getting them issued, and you can survive the amount of time that it takes for that to happen, that's a very powerful thing to own if it's something that someone is interested in. And they, sometimes acquisition is easier than licensing, quite honestly. Especially if they're like, well, we want to have this competitive edge. So if you can get a good patent, it's a great thing to have. But not everyone can pull that off.
Keep one still pending, by the way, if that happens, just to cover your butt. Get the, after the issued patent, before the issued patent issues, file a continuation.
Continuation, yeah.
So then you can come biting at the heels of the big fish who steals the idea and doesn't quite infringe the first one.
I would recommend you get someone else to talk to too. I mean, sometimes that nothing gets someone going knowing that there's someone else that's also in play. And so your leverage is only, restricted to how much they perceive what their loss is going to be. They don't make a deal with you. And the more you can do to kind of give them that perceived threat of kind of a loss, it's going to be a real cost to them if they don't make a deal with you by having someone else you're talking to. So I would say that, make sure that if you can, before you get to an exclusive period, that you kind of really trolled the waters a little bit. You've got a few people that you can talk to, because that, at least in my experience, that gets people to the table a lot quicker when they hear their competitor is also interested.
I totally agree. Especially, definitely before you make a decision, start any in-depth discussion, you definitely try the bluefish and also redfish. Make sure you choose the best, and maybe yellowfish. That's the first thing. Of course, also for MIT startups, usually if this they can say, oh, geez, this is referred by Graham. Graham Wright. That's actually powerful. I'm kidding, because we do monitor our startups. So which one's really good? In certain area. We got the requests from a lot of big companies coming. They're almost like big fish. I move to the MIT campus every day, every minute, literally. I saw some of the officers. They have liaison officers in those big companies, large organizations. I saw them on campus again, and I said, "Wait a minute, are you here every day?" Because they really go to different labs and meetings and like this. So you can imagine they are looking also. So there's big fish looking for a small one to bite. And so really, this is something. Or you feel referred by Bob Langer or some this is really big guys. They say this is good. That means a lot. Sometimes. Or if you have something, you say, I got a bigger company as a buyer or as a customer. This a big XYZ is my customer. Oh, that means a lot too. Because what they want to see is, of course, credibility. So because when you consider pay you the money as a partner, they are taking risk as well. Right? If you look at literally for Todd, if you think of Microsoft to work with you, so you need to take a risk. They pay you the money up front, invest on it. You need to report to the boss and say, yeah, I have invested 10. 6 of them actually turned out well, right? If only one, gosh, next year is or next year. Don't do this so quickly.
I feel like I have that conversation with my boss all the time.
It happens. This is really the one. And of course, you really have to have something solid. That's the key. That you can leverage. If it's something up in the air and then you talk and you really wait. You waste their time and also waste your own time as well.
I think again, you can get some advice from your lawyer, but there's also a bluffing game. And you have to be careful with that strategy up to a point. You can do it, but it's kind of like a threat. If you can't really execute on it, or at least execute partially on it, I've always found that it's backfired, because then you kind of go with you almost to the point where you're desperate, so you kind of go with your tail between your legs, and kind of like you're begging for help, and then the whole dialogue is completely changed. So it's you have to kind of figure out really. My advice is do your homework up front. So even if someone comes to you, don't just necessarily take that. Go and either if you're small, go and shop it yourself, or talk to a few people, or if you're larger, engage an investment banker to help you at least go shop it. It won't, maybe cost you $20 grand or something. But at least so you can at least see who else is interested.
So does that mean that you want to go into the conversation with the idea that, with the thinking that if you have to back out, you can't back out?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like generally you lose your integrity. It's really hard to get that back. And so the thing is you may go from business to business to business, but by and large is if you have something that's of value and you represent it as such, and you go and you talk to some people and it doesn't work out, it just happens. And I don't think anyone, at least in this country, no one falls you for that. And I think that. But when you go and you deal with these people, I mean, if you want to go back again, you want to be relatively straightforward. It's a little bit of game.
When you're at the point that you're conversing with the big fish, has the big fish, or have they already invested their time and money to understand what you're doing? Is there, in terms of big fish, are they already sunk their, enough of their time and money that they are willing to sort of make concession to you? Have you seen that thing happen, or? It
varies. So I mean, I've seen people come in with 10 people do due diligence, but I mean, I think they'll, just because they invest a lot doesn't mean, it depends on the company, right? I mean, again, do they have a lot of experience to do this? Do they have just business development people that do this? Do they have in-house counsel that's going to do it, or do they farm the counsel out? I mean, there's lots of ways that you can, that they can look at that. My experience I have with big fish is that sometimes you can negotiate with them forever. You can just go on and on. Just when you think you got a deal done, then back again with something else, and so it goes on and on and on. And that's when you kind of get nervous and go, well, maybe I showed them too much, and maybe they. So there is. It's not all. It's something that it was from my experience. You learn as you go along. Take good advice, I guess.
Question there, and then here, and then we're past the 8:30 mark. Okay. So if anybody has a hard stop.
I have a question.
You have a question?
I also have a reward if you get a good answer.
Okay.
So my question is very, very simple. How should I say? If when we talk about all this partnership, all this, what do you feel like? And I mean, based on your own experience, what you've already learned is fine. What do you feel the best way to do? And also, what the lessons you have learned? So you can share something like that. Even if it's not your own experience. So what you heard, or what you've learned from all stuff. And obviously, this gentleman shared some very good points.
I guess the biggest thing that I've learned so far is getting a warm intro. Getting a warm intro. So if Graham can introduce me to someone at, say, GE, it'll be 100 times better than me just calling up the industrial liaison person.
Okay, you almost got this.
I would say that if you have technology that you're trying to mainline into critical production processes at GE or any place like that, where you've got you've got research groups, and then you've got production line engineering, and you need to sell across to get your stuff infused in there, that's a long sell cycle. And you have to have a lot of stories to tell to get the resistance at each of those levels down and get the trust up, where they'll say, okay, we know you're little MIT ninjas, it's a huge risk, but I'm willing to take it because we really need what you've got. That's a hard place to get. And even if it's super compelling, it still takes a long time to get there. And then, because you've probably given up a lot of potential revenue to try to get in there because it's an early sale, you've kind of given away your leverage to price. So how then do you recuperate that leverage as that relationship grows to start to get to where you should be pricing your product? Those are all challenges, and
But would you, I mean, so knowing what you know now, would you have gone to a smaller company that actually would have kind of, you know, sort of maybe less robust processes, so maybe more open to taking a chance on something?
Probably, yeah. Yeah. I think, but I think, as you know, when you're dealing with MIT, the audience you tend to get are the research community, and those are the guys that are trying to drive these new technologies into their processes, and that, even their job is very difficult, and it takes them a long time because they're evangelizing internally against the old guard who thinks everything is going along just ducky, but you know, they're seeing their margins erode and they're losing contracts to, you know, Airbus or whatever, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of moving pieces to that, and it's hard to have the staying power to deal with it. Like strategically, those are long cycle events, and you might not be making a lot of sales, but you've got all these great prospects that are ongoing. How do you deal with that? You know, that's not a trivial thing either.
Well, I'm in experience. I did a patent, but it was a business process patent, so I'm not even sure if they're being held up any longer or whatever, but and it was very clever at the time, but boy, obsolescence hit in pretty fast, and I was probably due to that. I mean, it's just like sort of like I was, you know, my idea got better, and then it wasn't completely part of that patent any longer. So I had to like sell, you know, half, and then kind of hold the other half, and it was like this jockeying situation that was very strange because I had sort of, you know, really solidified this great patent concept, but I couldn't say the whole thing. I could only say half of it, because the other half was looking, you know, obsolete. And then I wanted to show the new half, and they didn't have time to get the, you know, the revisions in place. It was, but I have to agree, it was having it, yeah, it was a really weird situation, but having it helped in the negotiations and in the meetings that I had to, you know, attend, because at least I could go in and say at least I had a bullet in my gun. You know? I didn't know how to shoot her, I don't know if it worked, but I had that.
It might be firing this way.
So from the business process, I don't even know where they're at. I'd love to hear if they're still being honored or not, or
yeah, I think I think it's getting harder and harder.
Harder and harder, yeah.
Both ends of it. So I think what people tell us, I mean, when people ask us to file them, and the answer is, you know, it's going to cost some money, as they always do, and you should we hope that you find value in having a pending application, because it will be. For a long time.
Yes. Spoken like a true lawyer. Help you find value in our product.
Do we have a question over there?
Yeah.
Graham, does that satisfy your requirements?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, finally.
Nobel Prize.
So my question is a little more focused towards Todd and mobile app development. So basically, for instance, if you're not a developer, but you have an idea for an app, and you want to basically streamline that and, you know, get funding and whatnot, do you have any advice on like good networks or hubs for where you can basically streamline that idea forward to maybe get noticed by bigger fish, or just like what's the best route to go?
So they definitely exist. There are a bunch of communities out there. Now, if you're talking about specifically for Windows Phone, if you go to that create.msdf.com site, there's a whole set of forums in there. There's like a forums tab at the top. And people are always in there basically saying, hey, I've got this great idea, the greatest thing ever. And, but I don't know how to program at all. Is anyone interested? Now, the great news is there are tons of people that are interested. And the reason why that is there are a lot of people that are just trying to build up a portfolio. They might be students, right? Things like that. I for example, the game that I put out, I really wanted to have some original music in it. And I'm only a good musician in my mind. Don't worry, right? So I put it out there. I'm like, hey, I've got this great game. It's basically done, so I can actually, you know, show you what it looks like, blah, blah, blah. But I really need some music, and this is kind of the themes I'm thinking of that music should be. Sure enough, I had a whole bunch of people say to me, look, hey, I'm a music student. I'm actually trying to build up a portfolio. And they did all the music for free, and I put it in the game, and it worked out great. And I gave them, you know, I put them in the credits and all that. So So there's people desperate to be involved with it because, you know, my feeling is I sometimes feel like the world's greatest programmer with the worst ideas, right? And I'm like, gee, if someone had a great idea, I would go run with it, right? So there's definitely a market for that. Like I said, start with our forums for our device, and you'll definitely be able to find it.
I mean, just a kind of like a follow-up to that question. I'm just curious, so is there a model on sort of who gets what when, let's say, for example, you know, someone has an idea and you
Right.
go and we really have to contract out for programming. Have you ever seen anything? Is there sort of a standard to that?
There is no standard. Everything I've done has been completely different. So even like the game I did, I then needed graphics done. So some of those people I just paid outright. I was like, how much for a 3D model of like a ninja?